The gateway to a world of ideas and content, or a pathway to danger that needs oversight and controls? Is the internet a safe place for young people? Some countries are starting to crack down on online freedoms. Governments argue it's to protect young people from harm. But can you and should you regulate the internet? That debate is coming up on CounterPoints with me, Melinda Nusafora. The Australian government is expanding the reach of its self-described world-leading social media regulations, set to come into effect in December. Reversing a previous exemption, YouTube will now be included in a list of banned social media sites for children under the age of 16.
These rules and this law on behalf of parents who want and deserve better protections for their kids online. We want kids to know who they are before platforms assume who they are.
The UK is now enforcing age verification rules across a host of sites deemed to contain harmful or adult content. In both countries, it's not the users but the companies that face penalties for repeated breaches. But critics are concerned. They argue it sets a dangerous precedent and puts in risk. So of CounterPoints will debate who gets to decide what constitutes harmful content, how dangerous can some online content be for young people, and can online controls ever really work? Joining us to discuss the strategies and the implications of government internet controls is John Carr, an online safety expert who has advised and lobbied the UK government for the Online Safety Act and other similar bills. And he was also the Vice President at Myspace. And also on our panel, Daniel Kawczynski, a former Conservative MP and former member of the UK Parliament's Foreign Affairs Select Committee. Gentlemen, thanks for joining us here on CounterPoints. Not to be presumptuous, but as I assume both of you gentlemen also, remember a time before the internet, before computers in every home, before mobile phones in every pocket. But for so many younger generations, this extreme level of connectivity is just the norm. The internet has grown and morphed and developed so quickly, some would argue we've lost total control of it. It's perhaps one of the only parts of modern life that hasn't been regulated or isn't subject to stringent oversight. So John, considering your background, let's start with you. Who should decide what people need to be protected from and what is considered harmful content?
Well, ultimately, certainly in the case of the United Kingdom, we're a liberal democracy, our parliament decides what rules we live by, and they've done that in the form of the Online Safety Act. I might remind people, they don't know, this was a bill drafted under the last Conservative government, passed by the Parliament, where the Conservatives had a majority, but it was passed with all-party support. In fact, at the end, on the final votes, I don't think there was a single vote against it from any of the major political parties. So it's Parliament that decides. Then ultimately it's our regulators and the courts that interpret Parliament's wishes.
Okay, Daniel, what do you make of those comments? Should the government be deciding what law-abiding citizens are doing in their own homes?
Well, I think when it was said that not a single vote from any major political party was cast against this bill, that fills me with dread. Because in my 19 years experience of being a member of Parliament, it's when there was unanimity on the floor of the House of Commons and not the greatest possible debate, that's when real mistakes were made. And I could certainly reference moments in the last 20 years as a parliamentarian where there was unanimity and where that lack of debate led to serious complications and difficulties going forward. But I was the only Conservative member of Parliament to have been born in a communist country. And I try to explain to young people today what it was like growing up in a communist country, where one political party controlled the media, the newspapers, and every single aspect of the citizens' lives, and that citizen had no rights whatsoever. And it does frighten me a little bit about the sort of level of intrusion that we are now pushing into people's daily lives. I saw a free speech lawyer, Preston Byrne, on GB News earlier this afternoon, who was going to he's threatening to sue Ofcom. There's been an American congressional committee visiting London this week, also expressing their concerns about the impact on this bill on American companies. The White House is getting involved. It may even threaten our trade deal with the United States of America. So these things have to be debated constantly in the most robust possible way. But what really angers me is the minister, Peter Kyle, trying to suggest that people like Mr. Farage, who are opposed to this bill, are somehow in favor of Jimmy Savile. Now, I'm old enough to remember Jimmy Savile and what he did and what a figure of total hatred he has become in our country. Let's have a debate. Let's have a serious debate. Let's challenge one another in the most robust possible way. But this denigration to people who don't wish this legislation to be so controlling over our lives, I think they have to be afforded the respect that any functioning democracy ought to give them.
John, what do you make of that? Is this bordering on being too controlling? I mean, we've also looking at examples from Australia where come December, there's going to be the implementation of a total social media ban for children under 16. Is this a slow creep of control?
Well, Dzień dobry, by the way. What we ought to start from is the total anarchy that big tech, driven principally by the profit motive and nothing else, the total anarchy that they have unleashed. And what we're seeing now is reaction by parents, by children themselves, to a state of affairs that any civilized country must consider to be unacceptable. Peter Kyle's reference to Jimmy Savile was a very straightforward one. If you want to repeal the Online Safety Act and take us back to where we were, what you're talking about, in effect, is saying, have at it. Carry on the way things have been. Children being groomed, children being recruited by paedophiles, by terrorist networks. That is a state of affairs that is no longer acceptable. The companies, principally American companies, were given every opportunity to put these things right on a voluntary basis. They refused. What is Parliament, what is a government supposed to do in the face of such resolute determination to leave that anarchy as it is? It's not acceptable.
Is it anarchy, Daniel?
Well, at the end of the day, Parliament will not be deciding this. It's Ofcom, which are sort of faceless bureaucrats who will be potentially suing American companies and other people. Of course, children are probably the most emotive issue that you could possibly think of. Speaking as a father myself, the idea that one's child is somehow vulnerable to the most awful type of individuals or sort of subjects being shared with them is, particularly at a very young and vulnerable age, you'd have to have a heart of stone not to worry about children and their increasing ability to come across very nefarious content on the internet. What concerns me, and that reason I started to talk about my experiences of living in a communist country as a child, is that this is according to many American friends of mine, and actually in a recent opinion poll today, apparently 69% of the British electorate support this bill. But what concerns me is it's the thin end of the wedge. And if this is allowed and implemented, when will this Labour government start to impose restrictions on certain political narratives? I've been shown content today where controversial things are being said about immigration and other key areas of controversy in this country, and those are being put under restriction as well. So it's almost as if this could be the start of a government, and actually the majority of the British people didn't vote for this government, but it's got a massive majority. It can do anything it likes. But this could be the start of this government and subsequent governments starting to invade our ability as adults in utilizing the internet in a way that we ought to be entitled to, no matter how controversial the subjects and discussions are.
John, I wonder what you make of that. It's an interesting point that, okay, at the moment, this legislation, these regulations are being formulated to protect children from harmful or adult content, but if it's a government or when there's an arbitrary oversight of who's deciding what is harmful, could it impact political free speech? Could it impact the political discourse? Digital rights activists argue that if you normalise this sort of regulation, what does it open up to other forms of regulation?
Well, first of all, scaremongering isn't going to help. Painting a future of totalitarianism arising from a genuine attempt to protect children isn't going to help. And could I just say, there are no arbitrary rules being drawn up by anybody. It's true that the regulator, Ofcom, will ultimately have responsibility for enforcing the law, but they are guided 100% by codes of practice that have been approved specifically and in detail by Parliament. And then it will be a matter for our courts. And I'm sure Mr. Kawczynski also accepts that our courts are not subject to political influence. They are independent bodies capable of independently reviewing what Parliament's declared intentions were and taking a view on it. And there is nowhere in this legislation even the slightest hint of a desire to control political speech in the way that most people understand it.
Daniel, is it a bit scaremongering? I mean, there's been no indication that there's going to be a crackdown on political free speech.
Well, that's why I say it's the thin end of the wedge. You know, and my political opponent here is trying to suggest I'm scaremongering. It's actually normally dictatorships and governments will always try to use fear in order to justify increasing restrictions on the population at large. I think the vast majority of the people living here in the United Kingdom are decent, law-abiding citizens who want to protect themselves and their families. Of course, there is unfortunately a small group of people in any society who will behave incorrectly. But what we're seeing now is whether it's pernicious levels of taxation, whether it's restrictions on what we can look at on the internet. Apparently, I saw somewhere that apparently, 5 million people are now every day, you know, having to go through checks to look at pornography. Now, I'm not advocating that this is something that everybody should do, but, you know, I mean, that sort of level of intrusion to an adult and you know I just think is too much, and it's the
okay. Can I jump in there on the point about pornography, since I was very, very closely involved in getting that particular bit of the Online Safety Act passed by Parliament. Pornography has done an enormous amount of harm to children. That is not in dispute. The porn companies, like big tech in general, were given every opportunity to do what they said they wanted to do, which was keep that content away from children's eyes. They didn't do it. And why didn't they do it? Because they were not legally compelled to do it. And so the position now is very simple. The law simply requires porn companies to do what they were always meant to do, which was ensure that only adults can see it. And they do that in the simplest of ways. It takes a millisecond, maybe 1 second if you're on a slow connection, to confirm not your identity. Nobody is picking up any information about who you are, where you live, your bank account, nothing of that kind. The only thing that is being verified is that you are over the age of 18. We do the same for alcohol. We do the same for tobacco. We do the same for gambling. We're now doing it for pornography, and not before time, because of the damage that it's done to millions of children.
We're actually going to come to the age verification technologies in our future segment. So I'm going to put a pin in that discussion and go to the harms that we've been discussing as well. Australia and the UK are two of the most recent countries to enact online restrictions and regulations. Their governments argue they're necessary protection measures to keep young people safe online, as you, John, have been describing there. They've been spurred into action after often tragic examples of what can happen when there are no guardrails in place. John, do you think that perhaps as the internet has exploded over the decades, have we as a society underestimated how harmful the internet can be?
I don't think there's any doubt about that. And I could give you a long, long list of quotations from some of the early engineers, people like Vint Cerf, the people who developed the internet, starting in the 1960s, going on to the explosion with the World Wide Web emerging in the late 1980s, early 1990s, in which they said they had no idea that the internet was going to turn out the way it did. Remember, the internet began as a technology to allow academics, principally scientists in American and British universities, to exchange their research papers with each other rather more quickly than had been the case up till that point in time. Nobody anticipated the possibility that the internet would turn out the way it did. And we're now having to retrofit safeguards into it to protect not just children. There's lots and lots of other people who've been harmed and injured by scams and all kinds of things. People's life savings, pensioners' life savings, taken away by robbers and it wouldn't have been possible for that to happen if in the earlier days of the internet, these extremely rich business people in Silicon Valley, if they had thought and paused to put in greater security, greater checks and so on, none of this need have happened. And that's why governments are now having to act to protect their citizens from these unanticipated excesses.
So what is wrong with that, Daniel? I mean, if this has developed into a being that people didn't anticipate, then it seems only right that governments are now sort of having to play catch up a little bit.
Well, let's also recognize that the internet is a tremendous force for good and enables a lot of people to learn and to pick up information about all sorts of critical things that maybe they don't have. More and more libraries are being closed down, more and more facilities where people in rural areas can't get to have information to the extent that they need. The internet has transformed large parts of this country. And I'm a great fan of the internet, and I thank the people who devised this service. It's been transformatory. But I take you back to my earlier point. The Americans, the First Amendment is the single most important part of their constitution. And why are we now having the White House threatening sanctions on us? Why are congressional American committees coming here to express their concerns to the House of Commons? Why is this? Because it's all predicated in their fundamental concept of the freedom of speech and for human beings to engage with one another without the sanction or authoritarian influence and control of others. Let's wait and see what happens in other countries around the world. This isn't a situation peculiar to the United Kingdom. politicians in Saudi Arabia, in Australia, in Brazil, all over the world are having to grapple with the same problems that we have. Let's wait and see what happens. It will be very interesting for your television station in the coming months and years to analyze the differences of approach between parliamentarians and people who make policies around the world, because ultimately this should be a global response as to how we cooperate with one another to make sure that we promote freedom of speech and interaction, that we push back on governments around the world trying to restrict the freedom of speech, because there are governments in the world who would love to try to restrict their citizens from interacting on the internet. In fact, we have many examples where certain states around the world totally clamp down and restrict on anything that people are allowed to see and read. So let's just see how this pans out over the coming months and years. But to totally discount the reservations about freedom of speech, and that a subsequent government may be able to, this is a very highly toxic situation at the moment in terms of immigration, in terms of how this country is changing. And what frightened me today is somebody from your channel sharing with me images of the internet where somebody who has been making political statements related to immigration has been clamped down on, and you've got to put your age in order to be able to read what he says. Now, that can't be right in a normal functioning democracy.
John?
Well, I don't know. Well, first of all, I've worked for, as you said, I was a vice president of Myspace. I was on Microsoft's policy board for Europe, the Middle East, and Africa. I've worked for Google. I've worked for a great many tech companies over the years. So you could not find a greater enthusiast for the internet and the great things that it has enabled in the world. What I absolutely refuse to accept, however, that the bad stuff is the inevitable price that we have to pay in perpetuity in order to get the good stuff. Now, I don't know what the speech on immigration that you were referring to earlier was about, but but there's certainly in my knowledge of the way the law is meant to be, nobody has to prove they're over 18 to listen to a political speech. They have to prove they're over 18 to view pornography or buy alcohol or tobacco or go gambling. So, look, here's the thing: there are governments around the world who have, from the very beginning, refused to allow their citizens to have access to all of the great things that the internet can provide. These are the same governments that were doing exactly the same thing before the internet came along. In part, therefore, what my point is, to a very substantial degree, how this turns out will depend upon the political culture and traditions of each country. And I simply do not see the United Kingdom or or most of the countries in Western Europe teetering on the edge of totalitarianism because of a desire on the part of its legislators and government to protect children. That is scaremongering. It is not connected with the reality.
What do you make, John, of the example that perhaps the UK is out of step with the US? If some members of the US Congress are concerned about this, if the UK and the US are so out of step, is that an issue?
It certainly is. First of all, I do not believe for 1 minute that this government will repeal any significant or indeed any parts of the Online Safety Act simply because Donald Trump or some members of Congress say they don't like it. We're a sovereign country. I don't know which side Mr. Kawczynski was on the Brexit debate, but one of the things that we heard most frequently spoken about in that debate was the importance of us being a sovereign country. That means to say we make our own decisions, and our parliament has made a decision with all party support that the Online Safety Act is a necessary piece of legislation because the internet companies wouldn't correct the problems themselves. So what I would say is this. big tech is extremely influential in the United States. It's vast wealth it distributes amongst congressmen and senators with abandon. So I'm not at all surprised that congressmen are over here complaining on behalf of their clients, essentially, on behalf of American big tech companies who do not like this legislation. They're complying with it, but they lobbied against it. They tried to stop it through organizations that campaigned against it. They failed. And we're going to see now, we're going to test the resolve of this government to stand up for what the British Parliament has decided upon, and which, as Mr. Kawczynski has just said, 70%, was it today in the opinion polls? Overwhelmingly, the British public support this legislation because they want their children to have safer, better lives.
Daniel, do you think there is a possibility? I mean, let's be honest. If young people want to do something, access something, they're going to. We've seen the same, unfortunately, for the right or the wrong, with cigarettes, with alcohol. If there are now age verifications and government crackdowns and social media bans for young people, could this not push young people into darker corners of the internet that maybe could it potentially be worse?
Well, of course it could, and that's a very eloquent point that you've made, which I failed to bring up so far. But just before I answer that, let me just say that my opponent says that we are an independent sovereign nation. They have no right to interfere in our judicial process and all the rest of it. Actually, I campaigned for Brexit, and I was very pleased that my constituency voted for Brexit. So I feel very strongly about British sovereignty and British independence. But we are, to a certain degree, very much interconnected with the United States of America. Let's not forget that the United States of America, as a single entity, is our single biggest trading partner. The levels of bilateral investment, the largest European investment in America is British. The largest American investment in any European country is American. Our economies are incredibly aligned and in sync across many sectors. And one thing I heard today is that these big tech companies that we're being told are evil and pernicious and not doing the job they're meant to, basically a lot of the Americans are saying, fine, we just won't come to Britain. We won't operate in Britain. We will withdraw our investment because we're not prepared to be arrested or imprisoned because Ofcom decides that something that has appeared on the internet is unreasonable, and an American executive is not going to take that risk of wanting to invest in the United Kingdom. So that's a very important point. But your point about children then going to the dark corners of the web, my goodness me, we've tried to regulate everything. Selling alcohol. Well, of course, how many times are people operating shop corners selling alcohol illegally to children? How many times selling drugs on the streets is illegal? How many times do children manage to buy cannabis and drugs on the streets because they've got a contract that goes somewhere else? Politicians in this country always, particularly socialist ones, and I suspect my opponent is Labour because he certainly sounds as if he's a hardcore socialist, they think that the state is there to control everything and everybody, and that the individual should have no rights and responsibilities. In reality, that's very counterintuitive because that's not how society works.
Okay, John, a right of reply to that specific comment, and also to my question about whether it will encourage kids to look for this content in darker places.
Certainly in relation to pornography, what the new law will absolutely, definitely guarantee is that no 7-year-old, no 8-year-old, no 6-year-old will accidentally be confronted with images of gangbangs and rapes and bestiality, which is what's happening now. Now, you can always make an argument to say, to do nothing. There's alibis for inaction all of the time. And nobody has said that this is going to prevent every type of harm from reaching or affecting every child. But what it will definitely do is make a huge improvement for the great majority of children. A 16, 17-year-old teenager who is determined to reach bad bits of the internet, they'll probably do so. But a 12-year-old, an 11-year-old, a 13-year-old, 14-year-old, I don't know where the cutoff point will be, they won't be able to do it. And that's because this law enforces companies to take greater responsibility. And by the way, no American executive, no person of any kind is going to be going to jail because Ofcom says so. They may go to jail if a judge says so, if a court decides, but the circumstances in which that would be likely to happen are very extreme, and it's there as a kind of backstop weapon that can only be used against executives of companies that refuse to comply with our laws. We have exactly the same type of laws, by the way, in relation to the banking industry. After the financial crash of 2008, a whole new raft of laws were introduced to pin criminal liability on people in the City of London who were neglectful of their duties. And we've only copied that in relation to the online space.
Go ahead, Daniel.
I'd like to make a point that, I think you started the conversation by talking about those halcyon days where none of this existed, when we were all ourselves children. I was born in 1972, so I speak as a 53-year-old. But in my day, the families themselves, the father, the mother, the parents, the grandparents, everybody was very, very involved. And we had various, even in the 80s, there were things that children could come across which were inappropriate. And yet there seemed to be a much greater sense of responsibility from adults and parents and people in schools in controlling what happens to children. It just seems to me that this legislation is basically saying, you know what, we're going to take that responsibility ourselves as the state, as Ofcom, as bureaucrats, and don't you worry, mother and father, don't you worry, aunt and uncle, don't you worry, parents, or those nobody cares for these children more than their parents and their siblings and their family members. And I just worry that this is yet another step whereby the Orwellian state is taking responsibilities away from those who are ultimately responsible for protecting their children.
John?
The Online Safety Act is not a substitute for parenting. Quite the opposite. It's lots of provisions in there about improving the information that parents are given, the information that the children are given to keep children safer and have better lives. And I'm older than you, Mr. Kawczynski, I'm sad to say, and I remember those days too. But the fact is, the internet has completely changed the way young people are brought up, the way young people live their lives. And tech companies have simply refused to do the right thing. And they will comply with the law. We know that. And that's why the law has to be changed. Because if you leave it to them to do it on a voluntary basis, it won't happen.
That takes us on to our third and final segment, actually, quite succinctly, because there are big question marks over whether or not these kinds of regulations can ever be effective. For example, in the UK, and I found this fascinating, VPN downloads have surged since the age verification rules came into effect. Multiple VPN providers say sign-up rates in the UK have gone up more than 1,000% in the past week. And I'm not sure if it was John or Daniel who mentioned the survey, the YouGov survey, that yes, the majority of people, I'm looking at it here on my computer, support the measures, but also a majority of people don't think it will be effective. 64% say, even though, yes, we do support the implementation, we don't think it's going to work. So, John, because you were active in this, let me put it to you. Can these controls work?
Yes, they've worked with almost complete success in relation to online gambling, admittedly a different use case. And that law came into effect, by the way, under the 2005 Gambling Act, became operative on the 1st of September 2007. There's not been a single case that I'm aware of since then where a child has gone on the internet and used to do what they did before, tick a box to say they're 18, and then blow their pocket money on a horse. Now, first of all, let me just say that the law is not yet a week old, right? Or it might just be coming up to a week tomorrow. I think the law will have been in effect. We will wait. We will see. This is an experiment. I don't deny that. No other country in the world has attempted to do what the British are trying to do with this legislation. I'm absolutely confident that the technology exists and can work, and we'll just have to wait and see who's right and who's wrong.
Mm-hmm. Daniel, can it work if you could just download a VPN?
Oh, sorry. Can I just go? Sorry, I forgot. I meant to. Sorry, on the question of VPNs, I've seen these statistics about the increase. I wonder how many of those downloads have been generated by bots that have been set in motion by libertarians who are opposed to the legislation in the first place. But let me tell you this. Just don't let my old Etonian accent fool you. I'm actually a Yorkshireman from Leeds, right? My team, Leeds United. When I travel abroad, I used to try and use a VPN to watch Leeds playing on Sky Sports or watch Match of the Day on the BBC. Now it's impossible. Why? Because Sky Sports and the BBC can detect a VPN in milliseconds and they block it. So my point is very simple. VPNs potentially could provide a route around some of these laws, but if an online business doesn't take any steps to prevent VPNs from being used, it won't be complying with the law. So we'll see how much of an impact these VPNs have. I doubt that it's going to be as much as people are claiming it will be.
Daniel, what do you think? I mean, maybe this is a work in progress and the companies will just have to get smarter so that they comply with it.
Well, I mean, actually, I've been sent information by my friend in the Channel Islands that the number of VPNs acquired has gone up by not 1,000, but 1,400% over the last few days. And my friend also references that the demands are so extreme that the websites of many valuable community sites and small societies have already been taken down by organizations. So even legitimate community groups and small societies that are trying to do good, who don't have the resources of lawyers and advisors, feel threatened and worried about this and are taking their websites down. But the last thing I'd like to say is this, and of course, we're on Arabia, a Saudi channel, and as chairman, I was the chairman of the Saudi group in the House of Commons for 20 years, and I led 15 British parliamentary delegations to Riyadh in my time. I'm fascinated by the differences in approach to children in Saudi Arabia compared to those here in the United Kingdom. And rather than beating up the internet and internet providers and companies, I think we need to take a long, hard look at ourselves in Western liberal Europe and how our societies are functioning, rather than just blaming it all on the internet. Because quite frankly, the differences between ourselves and Saudi Arabia in how children are taught, schooled, and brought up to be good adults are profoundly different.
John, I wonder, you mentioned before about the age verification software or technology, perhaps I should say, and you said it's not tracking you and it's not looking at where you live, etc. But they are very real concerns that people have stressed online as this discussion has progressed in the past week. I mean, in Australia, there was a major data breach with a government health website, and they said it's completely safe to keep your health data online. and there was a major breach, and lots of, thousands of people's health data was released. How can people feel confident that if they are scanning an ID to prove their age, that their privacy is not going to be compromised?
Yeah, very good point. And by the way, could I just say, given Mr. Kawczynski's obvious admiration for the First Amendment in the United States, on the 27th of June, so not very long ago, the United States Supreme Court, all 9 justices agreed that requiring age verification for pornography sites was not a breach of the First Amendment. They said it was a perfectly reasonable policy, and in fact, they were responding to a case brought by libertarians against the state of Texas that had introduced a statewide law requiring age verification for pornography websites. And just in case your listeners or your viewers are unaware with it, Texas is not a socialist stronghold. It is probably one of the most strongest strongholds of the Republican Party in all of America. And yet even they decided to introduce a legal requirement for age verification. Now, the simple truth is there are a variety of ways in which you can do age verification, but some of which do involve personal data being collected, passport numbers and things of that kind. I wouldn't use an age verification technology that did that. And I wouldn't because I know there are alternative ways of doing age verification which have been certified as being 100% safe and secure, that don't require any kind of personal data to be collected and stored. You can do it with a facial recognition tool. In fact, there's a French company that I've met, they're based in Montpellier, who've developed a tool which, believe it or not, simply by looking at the pattern of veins in your hand through the camera in your phone, they can determine your age with, again, around 99.9%, 100% accuracy. The French court.
That's terrifying, John.
That this is a way of doing it. So, well,
that's
it's
terrifying.
only your age, remember. It's only your age. It's not who you are. It's not where you live. It's not your bank account. What they're simply saying is, this proves that you're over 18. So you can buy alcohol, you can go gambling, you can look at pornography, you can do all of these things without disclosing any information about who you are. So the possibility of a data breach simply does not exist. By the way, it's called, there are systems now called zero knowledge proofs. And that hand thing that I was describing is an example of that, where there is no need to do age verification that requires personal data of that kind to be handed over and stored by a company. And in fact, arguably, I think under English law, or the law of England and Wales, I should say, it would be illegal to collect that kind of information because our law says you're only supposed to collect the minimum information necessary to perform the task in hand. And if the task in hand is determining whether or not you are 18, you don't need to know the person's name. You don't need to know their address or any other information about them. There are other ways it can be done.
Daniel, does that placate a privacy concern?
No, not really. But what I would say is, I mean, the most interesting thing that I've heard during the course of this debate is from you as our sort of chair of the debate, in the sense that you acknowledge that the United Kingdom is the first and only country to do this to this extent. To be the first to do something, I think, is always, well, I mean, we were the first to implement Brexit. Sometimes I feel that it's being the first to do something is like walking through a minefield with a blindfold on. There are no signposts.
Somebody has to be first. Maybe it's an admirable thing to be.
Well, it's what you're doing is you are leaving a path of breadcrumbs for others to follow. If you are successful, and if you fail and fall into the quicksand or wherever it is, then they can avoid it. So this government, this Labour government, has decided, out of 210 countries in the world, they have decided to pioneer this legislation. It was initially instigated under the Conservatives. Let's wait and see what happens. Let's wait and see what happens over the next 1 to 2 or 3 years. But when Nigel Farage says that he will repeal this act if they get into office in 2029, and we don't know what sort of government there will be in 2029. But if it's a conservative or a reform government, or a coalition between the Conservatives and Reform, if people like me have witnessed over the next 3 to 4 years an increasing control by the state of what we are and are not allowed to see and view and all the rest of it, and it's starting to impinge on community groups and other organizations who can't grapple with this legislation, then of course a lot more people are going to be attracted to vote to repeal it. And then if it is going to be a success and can be proved to be a success, and my concerns can be proved to be not relevant. So the next couple of years is going to be very, very interesting to watch.
It will absolutely indeed. We're almost out of time, but a quick last word from you, John, before we wrap up as well.
Yeah, I agree. This is an experiment. I'm proud that Britain is the leader in this subject, in this area. It was a Conservative government that brought the legislation to Parliament, but it went through with all-party support. All of the major parties continue to support it. Nigel Farage is playing to a Trumpian playbook, hoping to curry favour, probably in the expectation of getting money from the likes of Elon Musk. So I'm not in the least bit surprised that he's saying what he's saying. In fact, I'm rather encouraged. Anything that Nigel Farage is in favour of, I'm against it, probably. But we shall see over the next few years. I agree with you, Daniel. Absolutely. We're going to see how this works out. I'm optimistic that British legal traditions, British political traditions will not lead us into any harmful paths at all.
It is going to be an interesting one to see, and what an experiment to witness in real time. Gentlemen, thank you both so much for such an interesting debate here on Counterpoints. Thank you to our panellists, John Carr, an online safety expert who has advised and lobbied the UK Parliament on the Online Safety Act, and Daniel Kawczynski, former Conservative MP and currently Strategic Communications Advisor. Thanks for your time on Counterpoints. And to you at home watching online, I'm sure, thank you for your participation here in tonight's Counterpoints debate. You can watch all our latest debates and interviews by subscribing to Al Arabiya English on YouTube, and be sure to follow us on X and TikTok. We'll see you next time.